Welcome to Retire Coast's series on the Hessians. This is the first of a complete series on the Hessians and their involvement in the American Revolution. If you've listened to the introduction article already, then you have some idea that the Hessians played a very important role in the American Revolution and an even more important role in the building of our nation, which most people aren't aware of. The entire series started out with the idea that the Hessians were simply a group of soldiers that were brought over by the British to help the British win the war against the Americans, or colonists at the time. There's much more to it than that, and I didn't learn any of this when I was in school or even college. And it was all rumors and propaganda that I did hear about. And I'm here to tell you that I was astounded by what I found. As a matter of fact, the article went as high as 33,000 words, maybe 34,000 words. It was so long that I just couldn't put it out the way it was because no one really goes to a site and reads that long. So I broke it up into sections that discuss different aspects of the Hessians. This one that you came to, which is the first in our series, is about the introduction. And basically, who were the Hessians? I wanted to clear the air on that, just in case you might have thought that you knew who they were. You probably don't, but that's all right. So we're going to get into a number of things here. We're going to talk about the various types of soldiers that they were. We're going to talk about the ones that were very similar to the Americans. They fought in the woods. They had excellent rifles. And in fact, the Hessians had the best cannon that were available out there. They were very disciplined, raised as children to become officers and men. And they were easy to bring in when the British monarch, who was also related to many of the German monarchs at the time, wanted to rent them essentially to help fight the war. And you'll read more about this in the article, but I wanted to also present to you a nice presentation that will go about 7 minutes after you finish listening to me that'll give you a really good insight into what happened and who these people really are. There's a lot more about it, as I mentioned in the other sections, but I want you to know who they were and the fact that they started out when they were very young. We have a draft in this country, or had a draft in this country, but in that area, which is now Germany, but they were mainly city-states at the time, they had conscripts. You had no choice. And for some, it was a lifetime engagement. They didn't have any choice. That's something else that you'll learn. So if you want to continue watching and learning more, as soon as I finish here in just a couple of seconds, you'll see a great presentation. And please go to our website, retirecoast.com, and read the entire article and read the entire series. It's absolutely fascinating. If you have German relatives, it might be possible that they actually started the process of coming over here when the Hessians came over, and that's something we explore as well. So thank you.
When we picture the American Revolution, the story usually features plucky colonists facing off against British redcoats. But the reality? It's a whole lot more complex. In today's explainer, we're diving into the untold story of the war's most misunderstood figures, the Hessians. Honestly, the deeper we look into this, the more captivating the history actually gets. We're going to peel back the layers of folklore and figure out exactly who these German soldiers really were and where on earth they came from.
To the American colonists, just hearing the word Hessian struck absolute terror. They were literally the ultimate nightmare scenario brought to life on their doorsteps. But we've got to ask, were they really the cold-blooded, greedy mercenaries our history books kind of make them out to be? Or were they actually reluctant captives of a rigid system, forced into a fight they had absolutely no stake in?
Section 1. The Hessian Mercenary Myth.
Think about the specific language Thomas Jefferson used in the Declaration of Independence. By explicitly dropping that terrifying word, mercenaries, Patriot leaders brilliantly weaponized the presence of these soldiers to stoke outrage and build vital support for independence.
For the colonists, these men became the ultimate symbol of a distant, tyrannical king who was perfectly willing to unleash absolute destruction on his own subjects.
But here's the thing. The historical reality completely shatters that colonial myth. These guys weren't soldiers of fortune out looking for plunder. Not at all. The vast majority were just everyday farmers, village tradesmen, and laborers forced into a distant war just to generate revenue for their rulers. They didn't cross the Atlantic because they wanted wealth. They were caught inside this incredibly rigid system where their leaders effectively traded human manpower for state funding. Wild, right?
Section 2. A fractured German world. To really wrap our heads around the Hessians, we actually have to completely erase the modern map of Germany from our minds. Back in 1776, this region was part of the ancient Holy Roman Empire, and it was a dizzying, chaotic patchwork. We're talking hundreds of independent territories, church-controlled lands run by prince-bishops, and wealthy self-governing city republics like Hamburg and Frankfurt. It wasn't one unified nation at all. It was a massive, super complex web of political alliances. So, while giants like Prussia and Austria dominated the region with sheer military might, smaller states like Hesse-Kassel and Brunswick had to figure out a completely different way to survive. And they did this through a highly profitable export industry, their own people. They essentially leased out massively outsized, hyper-professional standing armies. It was basically an essential survival tactic for these tiny states to gain diplomatic leverage, forge alliances, and ensure their economic survival in a really dangerous neighborhood.
Section 3. The Canton conscription system.
So how exactly does a tiny principality build such a massive war machine? Well, imagine a father having to register his 7-year-old son for the draft. Seriously, age 7. This was known as the Canton system, because they couldn't just rely on volunteers. They had to engineer a society built entirely around warfare and readiness. If you were selected in your teens, you didn't just serve a quick deployment. Nope. You were bound to the state indefinitely, perpetually balancing civilian farming with military drills, forever ready to deploy. And you know, the draft was far from equal either. Essential workers, eldest sons inheriting farms, wealthy landowners, they were all shielded to keep the local economy afloat. But if you were a younger son with no inheritance, maybe a struggling apprentice, or honestly, just someone local authorities deemed troublesome, well, you were handed a uniform and subjected to brutal, unyielding military discipline with absolutely no way out.
Section 4. Britain's deep German roots. Now, to the American colonists, hiring Germans seemed like a bizarre, even treacherous move. But to King George III, it was literally just family business. George belonged to the House of Hanover, which was a German royal dynasty, and he actually spoke German fluently, so he wasn't reaching out to unknown foreign mercenaries. He was making strategic deals with his own extended royal family within the interconnected, deeply related world of European royalty.
It really boils down to the ultimate pragmatic geopolitical transaction. Think about it. Britain had a massive global empire to defend, projecting power all the way from Canada to the Caribbean to India, but they completely lacked the standing land army required to also crush a sudden colonial rebellion. Meanwhile, the German princes had these highly trained surplus armies and desperately needed the state revenue and prestige. It was a perfect match of supply and demand. Entire professional regiments, complete with experienced officers and artillery, were simply leased right to the British Crown.
Section 5. Arrival in North America. Just imagine being a heavily disciplined Hessian soldier, finally stepping off a cramped, crowded transport ship into a completely alien landscape. These were men used to the highly structured, perfectly ordered societies of Central Europe. They had zero stake in the politics of this fight. They were simply following orders, shipped across a massive ocean to a place they knew absolutely nothing about, straight into a war they didn't ask for.
On August 15, 1776, this theoretical troop deal became a very terrifying reality for the colonists. Massive contingents of Hessians dropped anchor off Sandy Hook and disembarked onto Staten Island. And guys, this wasn't just a small reinforcement. It was a massive staging area for one of the largest military campaigns of the Revolutionary War. The sight of thousands of foreign troops in unfamiliar uniforms, marching and speaking a foreign tongue, entirely shifted the reality and the scale of the whole conflict. The culture shock must have been absolutely paralyzing. These drafted men were trading the tightly controlled, manicured societies of Central Europe for the wild, chaotic, and incredibly dense American frontier. The terrain was totally unforgiving, and the roads? Well, they were practically non-existent compared to Europe. And even worse, the fiercely independent, rebellious attitude of the frontier colonists was entirely alien to men who were raised in a system that demanded absolute, unquestioning submission to authority. So we leave these men poised on Staten Island,
These ordinary German farmers, branded as terrifying monsters by colonial propaganda, are now the literal tip of the spear for the British Empire. Marching straight into hostile territory, how will their rigid discipline hold up against a totally unpredictable American force? And more importantly, how will these deeply misunderstood, reluctant soldiers ultimately alter the destiny of a new nation? Well, that is a historical collision that would change the world forever.